Welcome to the Justice Eapen Show, sponsored by Palmetto Privacy. Palmetto Privacy is a Greenville-based technology startup developing products to keep the internet free and safe for all. Go check them out today at palmettoprivacy.com. Welcome to the Justice Eapen Show. I'm joined by Megha today. She is Margarita Evna95 on Twitter, Classical Girl 21 on Instagram, and Classical Ideals on Substack. Margarita, Megha, what do you call our little corner of Twitter where we've met one another and kind of followed one another for a few years now?
I don't know if there's a real name for it. Sanity Twitter. That's what I would call
Sanity Twitter. Aesthetic posting Twitter.
Aesthetic posting. It's like
you do a terrific.
Pardon?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say it's like when you go to a conference and like the presenters and officials there are talking about stuff, and you're there with your friends, and you all just make eye contact because you all understand like that none of the stuff being said is true or logical. And then afterwards, when you go into like you go to have a drink afterwards or have lunch, and then you all just let it all out, like what you were thinking the whole time, what you were really thinking. That's what I think of it as, because everyone has to keep poker face on. Yeah, because everyone has to keep on a little poker face when they're at work or school. They can't really voice their real concerns and opinions or questions.
I made a comment to you in our DMs about you being one of the best trad femme accounts on Twitter. And you came back with a question like, how did I get labeled as such? And I was curious, well, what does it mean to you? It sounded as if you don't like that label.
Yeah, because what I associate with that is, so there's many accounts that are like quote unquote trad femme, like self-professed to be. And usually they are very extreme. Like they don't believe in women getting educated. They don't even like art that's, shows a naked body of a woman. They don't like, they are very extreme. And I think that's why I don't associate myself, because they usually come from ex-feminists who were raised in the West, like for example, in California, and they become disillusioned with their environment. And so they swing to the opposite side of the pendulum and become like trad femmes, like quote unquote. And the dangers of that is, like how converts are always the most zealous and devoted religious followers. It's kind of like that effect. So they don't have a balanced opinion because they're still reeling and trying to compensate for a lifetime of leftism and degeneracy. So that's what I associate with that. And I think with these girls, usually when they get over this phase, they're going to come back to some sort of balance and sanity. And then they're going to be like a little bit embarrassed about stuff that they said, but then just like realize it was a growth phase. And like, yeah, so that's what I would associate with those kind of accounts.
There is something for the modern, I hate to use the word modern, the contemporary Christian, the contemporary believer, where you have to avoid reactionaryism for its own sake. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is you don't want to be associated with those accounts that are kind of, reactionary is the word, when you're just too far to the right, I guess. Does that sound right?
Yes. I always try to be balanced in my views. And especially as my account grew, people started to take things that I said out of context. They could take that some things were a joke and some things weren't. So I had to become a lot more careful with the words and like define exactly what it is and what context that I meant certain things. So that's how I avoid being a reactionary.
I wanted to talk about values because I think it's one of the things. Values are what we have in common in our little corner, this after party that we're having on Twitter, where it's like people who have got kind of a sane, I hate calling them conservative. I do feel like that's one of the,
it's more aligned with nature. Works. That's what I would call it. Values that are aligned with
Aligned with nature.
both aligned with nature and the nobility of man.
Well, dive into that a little bit. Where alignment with nature, nobility of man, where do these values come from? And also, if you could talk a little bit about your story and how you got there, I think that would be helpful for anyone who's listening.
Yeah, that's difficult because I've never even considered the story myself, like where my values come from. It's a very interesting question. I guess some of them you are just raised around certain values and you come to accept them. But I think a lot of it comes from within. So J.R. Tolkien is one of my favorite writers. He wrote Lord of the Rings, as obviously many people know, but he also wrote a series of essays. And one of my favorite essays by him is on fairy tales. So he writes that children are the best. Fairy tales are not only meant for children, even though more recently they've been marketed specifically for children. Fairy tales are enjoyed by both adults and children alike, and that's why parents pass them on. And in order to enjoy fairy tales, you need to have a sense of justice. This sense of justice is not something that you're taught. It's something that children are just naturally born with. Because if you tell them a story with a hero and a villain, a monster, princess, they'll immediately know who they're rooting for and who's the bad guy without the story having to tell them. They won't need someone to say that the stepsisters are evil and, because they're torturing Cinderella. They'll automatically root for Cinderella to marry the prince. So this sense of justice is inherent. And the more I think about it, the more I believe that it's just our environment. A corrupted environment can subdue or suppress this sense of justice, but it's always there. And if we creating a healthy environment is not about changing someone, it's about allowing their nature to thrive and come through and express itself in its full form. So if we provide, for example, a perfect environment for a monkey, it's going to behave like a monkey. The same thing applies to like a human being. And I think, that's where I think our values come from. They're just natural.
And what about yourself? You say that you kind of grew up around these values or surrounded by, did you grow up in a family that was religious, or did you have teachers that were formative in your life?
My family wasn't very religious. Like, we're religious as in we do all of the rituals, we pray together, like often, and we're religious in that sense. And often my parents would tell me things from the Gita, like whenever we're having like life problems, they would always bring up certain stories from the Gita to tell us how to deal with them. But other than that, we weren't extremely religious. But that's not where I would say the values came from. I think for me personally, they came from just, my parents are very honest people. They never lie to us. And I think you model the behavior of your parents. So I never was someone who, like, honesty is a very important value for me. So honesty doesn't just come in relationships. It also comes in being honest with yourself about what you like and what you don't like, or what feels good to you and what doesn't. And also intellectual honesty when you're, logically thinking through a problem such as systemic racism, white privilege, or take any political issue. If you're honest with yourself intellectually about it, you start to see through some of the problems in leftism. It's not necessarily that we disagree. It's just that it's dishonest. So I think that's where some of my ideals and my values come from, is just a habit of being honest with myself and others. And I think if more people were honest, they would come to similar conclusions.
Yeah. The question of honesty, and I think another way of putting it is sincerity. I believe that's how Howard Thurman, the theologian, put it, is one of the great, how do I put it, mechanisms of change in the world, right? Speaking the truth is how you can interact with others in such a way to bring about positive outcomes. You mentioned that you grew up in, it sounds like a Hindu family. The Bhagavad Gita is a Hindu scripture, right? But I think that at one point I was talking to you and you were dabbling in like Orthodox Christianity. Am I imagining this?
Yeah, I was just interested by it, so I started to learn about it.
Okay, but you're not practicing in the Orthodox Church or anything like that?
No, sometimes I volunteer to help there because it was just like close by to where I used to live.
Yeah, and was this Eastern Orthodox or like Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox? Do you remember what the sort of denomination
Russian
was?
Orthodox.
Russian Orthodox. Yeah, the Eastern Orthodox. I mean, and I think I might be mistaken, but I believe that Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, et cetera, are all sort of under the umbrella of Eastern Orthodoxy. But certainly the sort of Eastern branch of the Orthodox Church, or I think most Christians would just call this Orthodoxy or the Orthodox Church. They have got an epistemology that is very, I mean, it's an Eastern epistemology. It's very much kind of an experiential type of epistemology that jives well with the sort of like Hindu, Buddhist, Eastern philosophical beliefs about how we come to know reality. And I mean, you would know it better than me probably, so please tell me if I'm wrong, but in the Eastern philosophical traditions, you've kind of got this idea of knowledge of the truth is through our subjective experiences and therefore like tenuous at best. Or how would you characterize kind of the epistemology of the Hinduism that you were raised with?
I actually don't know a lot about that, so I haven't given it much thought. How do we come to know? So when I was younger,
you were raised in Canada, right?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, so it's just strange because you would have been kind of like an Eastern family or like a you know, if you're I guess if you're Hindu, your parents are probably from India. If they're from India in Canada, they're living kind of in like the West. They're living in the West, but extracted out of an Eastern philosophical mindset. And so there's an interesting, how does that work in an individual?
I've often thought about that I live in two different cultures. I have one foot in two places at once. And that's really affected how I relate to people, because someone who grew up only with Western values, it's hard for them to understand why I do certain things or why I believe certain things. And also vice versa for people who grew up only in the East. They don't understand like certain values that I have. So it's kind of like, I try to take the best of both. I think both Eastern and Western thinking systems have valuable things to offer. And since we live in a globalized world, you can't really, it's hard to avoid that. You can either make the best of it or you can capitulate to the problems that many people seem to have done. So some of the problems would be that many people who grew up in a globalized society, they seem to believe that just because they see that other people are living with a different set of values than mine, than my parents, that means no value systems are valid and you can just do whatever you want. So that's one way that people take it. Another way that people take it is they become extremist in their own values, like where their parents come from, and become very intolerant toward those of others and just tend to think that they're wrong and evil about everything, or they're stupid, or they completely reject their parents and go toward the Western stuff, and they kind of have an identity crisis because they kind of like lose their past, and you need your past as a foundation for your identity. So what I've tried to do is do neither and none of these things, and instead I try to appreciate how my parents grew up and their values and take the best of those, and I measure which values are good based on the results that it yields for people. So, you know, if people following those types of values are living a happy life, then those are good values. And then I mix those with the Western ones to create like my own kind of path through life. And I think everyone kind of does that these days.
Right. Well, in some sense, that's unavoidable, right? Like you are you, and you are the only person who occupies the intersection of environment and genetics that you occupy. So there's really no, I mean, that's part of the beauty of it. Yeah, we could plumb the depths there. I want to talk a little bit about, while we're kind of on the philosophical bend, I want to talk about aesthetics, because I think one thing that you do really well in your online presence is, I wanted to ask you about aesthetics. What, first of all, what are they for someone who like is not familiar with the philosophical concept of aesthetics? You have terrific aesthetics, at least on your online profile, and it seems like something that you've cultivated over the years. So I'm curious, what is driving you there? Where do your values in that arena come from? And then a question that you could answer if you wanted one was, how do you know, or how do we know what is objectively beautiful?
Okay, these are very good questions. My aesthetics come from what I like to look at, and just being honest with myself, what's beautiful and what isn't. It's not to impress someone. It's not to look edgy or like to look a certain way to others or to have a certain kind of identity. Like that's how a lot of people build their aesthetics, is based on what they want their identity to be. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it, because your identity shouldn't be something that you try to build. It just is. By pursuing things that you truly like and you are actually passionate about, it should come out naturally. And so my
Have
aesthetics.
You read Jean-Paul Sartre? Oh, because you were talking kind of about how our aesthetic values should not come from other people's perspectives or perceptions of us, but rather they should come from who we are inherently. I asked if you know about Jean-Paul Sartre because he had kind of this idea of, us being defined by what we do, and that in some sense we shouldn't be influenced by other people's ideas. And I'm not at all an atheist. I guess he's an existentialist. I'm kind of an existentialist in like a Dostoevsky, like in the line of Christian existentialism. But I'm just curious what you think about that. I mean, where does that moral sort of imperative come from for us to be original or ourselves?
You asked so many good questions. It's hard to answer them.
No worries. You don't have to be right either. You can just think out loud. Like, I just make stuff up pretty much on the spot. So.
Yeah. I don't know where it comes from, the essence of you, like who you are. I think the main thing is to be healthy. If you're well-nourished and you're getting sunshine and fresh air and you have good relationships, then the real you can actually come out. Whereas if you're bogged down by like an inflamed gut, like you're malnourished, you're hungry, or you're always on like some kind of sugar rush or like caffeine rush, and you haven't seen the sun in 10 days, like you're not going to be your real self. Or if you've gone through some kind of like trauma, you're not going to be your real self. You're going to be like your aesthetic tastes are going to be different, your musical tastes, your values, your outlook on life, like all of these things, like that. If you're unhealthy, they're not going to be an accurate portrayal of who you really are. So I think that's the first thing. And people notice that when they, for example, get off of a vegan diet and they start to eat animal protein again, that they become less neurotic, and their like mindset changes, their personality changes to become more chill. Or when people start to move back home with their family, or they start to do things where they're socializing more, their outlook on the world changes. Even down to like the taste in clothes. Like if you'll notice, a lot of women who it's like this phenomenon where you see women who have very like edgy tastes in clothes, lots of piercings, all this kind of stuff. They usually have gone through some kind of trauma in their life, and they need to wear this stuff so that people don't come near them. It's a repellent. They know it's a repellent. And when they feel this stuff, when they fix their gut issues, when they fix their emotional issues, their aesthetic returns back to like a healthy aesthetic again. And they start to like those feminine things, which they previously didn't like.
Now, I wasn't going to go here, but you've mentioned now gut issues a couple of times. And I know you've got some educational background in like biology or something. Am I right? Am I making this up? Could you, I mean, teach me about that, because I've heard a lot in recent years about like your gut biome and probiotics. I had an Uber driver claim that his children, two of them, that their autism was cured by a high probiotic diet. And I just remember thinking at this time, I was, this was 4 or 5 years ago that I heard this from an Uber driver. I was like, you're an Uber driver, you're not a credible source. But it stuck with me because it was such an extravagant story. What's going on there? What's the real science look like? I mean, what's your experience in this I don't even know what you call it, this nutritional sort of revolution that's happening?
So I have a background in biology and anatomy, as well as a master's in neuroscience, but my education in nutrition has been self-taught, and I've been really obsessed with it since I was a teenager, learning as much as I can. I used to be a vegan/vegetarian for like a year when I was 20. And I only got into that by doing like a lot of research beforehand. And then I did a lot of research again afterwards. And I realized like I like debunked a lot of the problems with it. With the gut issues, like I'll just focus on one thing, because this whole discussion can be like, I can talk about it for 10 hours. But with the gut issues specifically, there are multiple reasons why they are so prevalent in our society today. One of them is that all of our food is hyper sanitized, pasteurized, heated, cooked. And so all of the bacteria in our food is, cooked away, killed. And so our guts are bacteria deficient. On top of that, we take antibiotics for every small thing. So further depletion of gut bacteria. And the bacteria in our gut are very important in order to help us digest our food and absorb the nutrients from it. So if you are bacteria deficient and you're eating food, you're actually not absorbing many of the nutrients from that food in the first place. So malnourishment is a big problem in our society. Even though we have a lot of food and people are obese, they can still be malnourished. So an obese person, like even if you're eating the same amount of calories absorbed, it doesn't mean that you're getting the same kind of nutrients from those calories. You can eat 5,000 calories that are completely void of nutrients. So that's one of the reasons. And our gut bacteria actually connects to the brain through the gut-brain axis. That's well known. It produces certain factors that interact with our neurotransmitters. And so neurotransmitters are messages that one brain cell sends to another. But not only that, we don't just think and feel with our brain, as many people would like to assume. We actually think and feel with our whole body. So I often say this, that the mind is all over the body, because what is a brain cell? A brain cell is something that processes, remembers information, and can direct actions following it. So this quality is not only exclusive to brain cells. Every cell in your body is capable of it. Every time you go out in the sun, your skin actually processes the information about the light and can begin to change its color so that you'll be better protected. Our muscle cells remember certain patterns of movement and can help you prepare. So when a hockey player, for example, has like those lightning fast reflexes, that's like they're actually measured, and they're way too fast to have occurred downstream of the brain telling the leg and the hand how to coordinate themselves. So because they happen so fast, when neuroscientists explored, they saw that actually these instructions were not coming from the brain, they were coming from the leg itself. The leg was thinking. So our gut is also a thinking machine. It also produces feelings. So if you can process information and think with your leg, you can think with your gut. So it affects our emotions as well. insofar as emotions are a thinking processing system. And I think a lot of people also have very thin intestines because they're not nourishing themselves enough. And intestines are one of those tissues in our body that constantly need to be regenerated every 3 days. So if somebody has thinning hair, for example, they also likely have other issues in their body, like thinning skin. And then if you like how somebody is on the outside is how they are on the inside, physiologically speaking. So if they have thinning skin, thinning hair, think about how their organs would be, right? Because your organs also need to regenerate, and they're likely also not getting the nutrients to do that properly. So if you have thin intestines, on top of that, if you're eating a diet high in raw plants, you're going to face issues because we do not have 4 stomachs to digest those plants properly. So because we're not ruminants, so we can't ferment them in our stomachs as like a cow can. And so this burden in our intestines causes a problem called leaky gut. A lot of people have leaky gut and they don't even know, or they have IBS or Crohn's. And these are all just terms that mean inflammation of the intestines because they are overburdened. So imagine that a huge part of your body that is responsible for thinking and feeling is burdened by inflammation and has holes in it potentially, and is thinned out by malnourishment that prevented regeneration. How would that affect somebody's emotions and ability to think? Of course they would be neurotic. Of course they would have messed up feelings and values and everything like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. I was hoping, or I'd like to know, because you mentioned processed foods, you mentioned antibiotics. What would be kind of like, what would be your prescription, right? Like would you know, is it eat sauerkraut or yogurt? And also, I guess a curiosity that I have is like, if probiotics are encouraging bacterial growth, it seems like there would also be a sweet spot because I mean, my intuition tells me that too much yogurt might be a bad thing. Can you kind of talk about what the prescriptions would be? Like what would be like if I was going to make lifestyle changes, let's say I'm removing processed foods, generally speaking, and I'm not taking antibiotics. But like, what would be like the good sources of it? Are probiotics the answer here?
Not really. Probiotics are kind of like,
okay.
It's kind of like an illogical way of doing it. So the funniest place where I see probiotics is in milk.
Okay.
Because first you take the milk that's perfectly good, full of good bacteria, everything that you need, cream, all these nutrients, and then they pasteurize the hell out of it, boil it, irradiate it usually with UV light, kill everything nutritious in that milk possible. Then they thin it down and remove the fat from it. And then they go to the factory and they add factory-made bacteria into it called probiotics, and they sell it for $8. Like, what is the logic? Whereas if you go directly to the farmer, you become his best friend. For $2, you can get really good quality milk, raw milk that has the cream, bacteria, nutrients, everything. Like, nature's already added the bacteria into our food for us. We just have to not mess it up. So I would recommend that.
So it's funny that you mentioned this because like I'm already on the raw milk diet.
Yeah, so that's great. I would recommend like raw dairy.
And we should normalize it. Yeah.
Yes, it should be raw dairy and also raw meat. I know people are very uncomfortable with that, but it's the best place to get bacteria to replenish your gut. Usually people who are very bacteria deficient will initially get a fever when they eat this stuff, but that's actually, and even with raw milk, if you're bacteria deficient and you have raw milk, you're probably going to get sick at first. And that's because the bacteria are settling in. They need to like make space, you know? And when you, in a lab, when you heat up the environment for the bacteria, it actually promotes their growth and they can settle in and produce the next generation. And then you can turn the heat back down again. So the same thing kind of.
So that's fascinating.
Yeah, body does the same thing with a fever. The fever is purposeful to help bacteria to grow. The same thing happens when we get sick, actually.
Really?
Because when we get sick, why does the body give us a fever? Mainstream medicine will tell you because you want to kill the bacteria. But if you even just think about it logically, that fever is not a high enough temperature to kill bacteria. It's like 37, it's like only a few degrees above 37 degrees Celsius. So, but that temperature is high enough to promote bacterial growth. So why would your body do that? Because your body understands that bacteria actually help it to get rid of the problems, whatever toxicity is ailing your body. And so bacteria are saprophytes. They eat diseased and dead tissue. And so that's why your body gives you a fever when you're ill, so that the bacteria can help consume whatever toxins it's trying to get rid of.
So raw milk, raw beef. This, by the way, this is fascinating because I definitely was under the illusion that your fever was just sort of a secondary effect of your immune system on overdrive. So to hear that it's actually your body, sort of, what's the word when you make it
Helping.
what do you do with eggs? Yeah, but what do you do with eggs when you make them warm? You incubate
Boil
them. No, you incubate. But it's like your
Yeah.
body like incubating bacteria. So that's
Yeah.
a fascinating thing. I never. And then you say raw milk, raw beef. These are. I mean, first of all, I threw away all establishment nutrition as soon as I spent a month on the carnivore diet and just realized, oh, this is like the best I've ever felt. And clearly someone's been lying to me about the need for like vegetables and all that. Now I don't do carnivore all the time because that seems boring. And so much of my life is optimized around just enjoying myself that I don't do that all the time. But it is good to know that,
I
okay,
actually don't think, I don't think carnivore is very healthy either. I think people feel healthy on it initially because they're getting a lot of nutrients that they might have been missing before by holding back on the meat consumption. And they're usually cutting out a lot of things like vegetables, raw vegetables especially, that they might have been eating. But I think carnivores, especially carnivores who are eating like only cooked meat, are missing out a lot of nutrients because there are nutrients that you get in raw foods that you don't get in cooked foods. So in addition to that, they're usually not getting enough fat. And like they wrongly, I think carnivores, like people, advocates of the carnivore diet, wrongly vilify natural sugars and like fruits, which are actually extremely helpful to you. So yeah, I think
let me ask you this. And I was not expecting to go so far down the nutritional route, but I am curious now. To what degree do you think our nutritional requirements are like hereditary or genetic? Because it sort of appears to me as if like, how do I put this? Like Northern Europeans and Scandinavians seem to do really well on a carnivore diet, but like, I can't really imagine a lot of Indians doing, Indians have lived for like tens of thousands of years on a largely vegetarian diet. I just can't imagine that after all of that optimization for a specific kind of diet, that they would be able to accommodate a radically different kind of diet. And then conversely, the same thing can be said for like, there are like indigenous African tribes like the Maasai that don't eat anything but beef and raw milk.
So here I'll go back to the logic part.
Yeah.
I'll start with this with logic. Human beings are animals at a base level, at a physiological material level. We're animals. Would you agree with that? Okay.
For the sake of for biological agreement, I'll say sure. But
biologically, physically, materially speaking,
sure.
Human beings are animals. Yes. Okay. So if you have a parrot who lives in China versus a parrot who lives in America, do you think it would have the same diet requirements?
No. Oh, probably pretty similar, but
pretty similar, different. Right? If you have a dog a dog who lives in Denmark versus a dog who lives in Mexico, do you think the dogs would require basically the same things to thrive across
Probably.
breeds of dogs, right? Chihuahua to Great Dane probably require the same kind of food to be the healthiest possible dog. It's not like a Chihuahua is going to eat berries and a Great Dane's going to eat steak, and they're both going to want the steak because they're both dogs. Whenever we think about animals, I think human beings have a tendency of being very logical, clear-minded, clear thinkers when it comes to animals, and then we just throw that all away when it comes to ourselves for some reason. So all human beings are the same species, and therefore we have a same optimal diet that everybody benefits from. So now when it comes to Indians,
do you think Indians have just been shooting themselves in the foot?
Indians have not been, first of all, they have not been vegetarian for most of human history, as modern Indians would like to believe. It's actually quite recent. There are,
Really?
texts that talk about Indians drinking blood. Yeah, drinking animal blood was very common. There are, even when I talk to my great grandmother and stuff, they would talk about eating raw organs. When somebody was really sick, that's what they would give them, raw organs. And it was just very taboo. You didn't talk about it, but everybody knew that that's what worked. It was like the old wives' tale of medicine, but it makes total sense. So Indians, for a large part of human history, let's look at which human beings across the world look like an optimal human being. Is it going to be a 5'1" Gujarati guy from West India? Or is it going to be a 7-foot Chad Danish guy who has rosy cheeks and luscious hair? Or is it going to be the 5'1" Gujarati guy who's bald by the time he's 30? Who do you think is a better picture of optimal human health? The Scandinavian guy, right? It doesn't. So they have been shooting themselves.
There is something about the Indians that they seem like they've had a very cushy kind of climate.
If you even look at most Indian girls, they're very short. They're very the nutritional deficiency is visible in the aesthetics, and they just kind of accept the aesthetics as inevitable. And it's unfortunate because no one should accept ill health as some inevitable hereditary thing that they just have to live with. I think everyone should understand that their nature and optimize it so that they can thrive as a human being, not just exist and survive. And another thing is that before 1950, most Indians did not get things like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, all of these things because they were eating raw dairy.
Right.
So even if they were vegetarian, they were getting that aspect of their nutrition supplemented. So they were strong. They had very nice hair. They didn't get diabetes. But then after, I think the 50s, I can't remember the exact time when it was introduced, they started to tell them that vegetable oils should be used instead of raw dairy. And then also raw dairy, they started telling people that they had to boil their milk to drink it. People just believed that, and they wrecked what good stuff they did have in their diet.
So, wow, we've gotten completely derailed here by the nutrition question, but it's really fascinating. I feel like there's a lot more we could get into there. I have a friend I want to introduce you to who's she's also very into the raw meat diet. She does something called the essentialist diet, where for her it's just she'll have a piece of steak with a raw oyster and some caviar, or some tartare with they're always I don't know, she finds interesting seafoods, like a sea urchin or something like that, which I find fascinating. She's, I think, of Japanese or extract. So, but this is the same thing where it just seems like people from different parts of the world would kind of be optimized for different kinds of diets. But I think
there is something to say about that when it comes. I was saying your earlier question, there probably is something to do with that when it comes to grains, because people from South Asians tend to do better with rice, whereas Europeans tend to do better with potatoes. So with regards to grains and vegetables, there seems to be some difference in the ability to digest those things. But I think when it comes to just like core nutrition, like the meats and the fats and things like that, there it seems to be universal because we're all the same species.
Where do you land on gluten?
Uh, I know it's a protein or something in bread, and that's about it. I don't think about it too much. I eat bread sometimes.
So you do eat
Actually, I
bread?
eat bread pretty often. Huh?
Okay,
I eat
cool.
just
No, that's good.
I like sourdough bread.
The only the only things I've noticed really have like a negative impact on me are, and in this order, sugar, gluten, anything, meaning bread, pasta, whatever, beer, especially. And then more recently, I've noticed that actually like pretty much fried foods do have a negative impact on my energy levels. Uh, I don't know about you either. I'm probably a little bit older than you, but I've
The
noticed that
vegetable oils probably.
you mentioned something about vegetable oil,
Yeah,
and so the vegetable oil in the fried food is what causes the problem, you think?
probably. I think so.
I want to wrap it up because we've already kind of gone like longer than we thought, or to at least a different time than we thought. I had a bunch of questions here. We didn't even get to politics. We didn't get to technology or futurism. So we could, we have a lot that we could go into on another occasion. I do want to give you the chance for the final word. So any like final plugs or asks for the audience, where people can find you, how they can support you, anything like that, feel free to take advantage of the platform.
I would say you can follow me on Instagram, classicalgirl21, and that's where I share a lot of my writing. And yeah, that's about it. I'm going to be coming out with a guide to poetry soon because I know that a lot of people want to learn about English literature or they want to teach that to their kids as homeschooling becomes more popular. But the resources for this aren't always as easily available on the internet as for math and science. So I'm putting something together, something to look out for. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on, Megha. That's it for this episode of the Justice Epen Show. Thank you again to our guest, Megha, Classical Girl 21 on Instagram. And once again, I'm Justice Epen. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your favorite podcast player. You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So add me on all of those. It's at Justice Epen. And join us again next week on the Justice Epen Show.